I went one time to a church a few years back in the 90s, and the preacher got up from behind the pulpit. I won't mention the name. It's in my autobiography, though. You're going to have to buy my autobiography to get the whole details of it. And that's right. My autobiography, The Trans Evangelist, Life and Times of a Transgender Pentecostal Preacher, is available now through Amazon and Create Space. But I shared this one experience in my autobiography. And oh, by the way, too, the film documentary about my life, The Trans Evangelist, is out now, too. Anyhow, I just thought I'd throw that in for good measure. But that preacher got up and blasted me from behind that pulpit. He didn't mention my name. It was a small congregation, and it was obvious who he was talking about. And about the ministry and the message that God called me to preach, he said from behind the pulpit, you need to stop preaching that stuff, and you need to start living as a man and go chasing women. And he even said that I had insinuated that because of my transsexuality, I had committed the unforgivable sin, and he blasted me, and he said, this gay pride, I'm against it, and God's against it. And I stormed out of that church I was livid with anger. I was furious. I thought, how dare he, a minister of the gospel who should be lifting up and glorifying Jesus Christ and the salvation he provides, gets up there and misuses the sacred desk, the pulpit, to blast me because of my transsexuality. And I was furious. Well, I went home, we didn't have computers then, and I wrote a poison pen letter that would, if there was a contest for poison pen letters, I would have won the first prize for the poison pen award, hands down. I mean, I was livid. And I wrote a 2-page letter, and I was going to send it to people connected with this minister in California and to a couple of members of his church, and just blasted him. Anyhow, the Lord tapped me on the shoulder. As mad as I would, Jesus was able to get a word in edgewise, believe it or not, you know. And people have accused me when I've done interviews that the other person had to get in a word in edgewise. But anyway, that's just me. And Fred Willard said on a program I did, he said, they told me you're going to have trouble getting Sister Paula to talk. And he was kind of being kind of sarcastic about that. And anyway, the Lord got a word in edgewise as I finished writing that letter and said, put the letter away. Because when we're angry, you know, we want to take the letter or the email and just, boom, send it out right now, you know, before I change my mind. When 9 times out of 10, if you let it wait for a couple of days and cool down and you get more level-headed, you might think otherwise. But anyway, the Lord told me, it was on a Monday that I wrote the letter. The preacher had blasted me from the pulpit on a Sunday. And it was on a Monday when I wrote the letter. And the Lord told me, if 7 days from now, next Monday, you still want to send the letter, then send it. By Friday of that week, 5 days later, I tore that letter up into small pieces. And that was it. But I thought, I'm never going to go to that church again. They'll never see me darken the door of that church. Of course, I don't think they would have cared anyway. Like I say, forgiveness had nothing to do with them and had to do with me. It was up to me if I'm going to practice the gospel that I preach to forgive them. Whether they wanted me there or not was neither here nor there as far as my own personal inner peace, my own clear conscience and inner peace was concerned. Well, 2 Sundays went by and I got up and I was getting ready to go to a different church service that Sunday when the Lord tapped me on the shoulder again and said, I want you to go back to that church. And I didn't want to. Why should I go back there after what he said? Blah, 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 you know. But the direction of the Holy Spirit was clear. I knew that I had to go back to that church. And so I did. I went back to the church, and the service had started. And then a friend of mine came up who is a fan of my television ministry. There are people in these evangelical right-wing churches, individual people, that accept me as a Christian transsexual and accept the fact that God has called me to preach. Even if the leadership of the church doesn't accept me, there are many people in all of these fundamentalist churches that do accept me. And this was an old friend of mine from way back when. She walked up to me and said, "See that woman sitting right over there?" She said, "That's Roberta." Well, Roberta was a friend of mine I have known since my childhood days, somebody I was very fond of, had just moved back to Portland from Los Angeles, and I had no idea that she was going to be there. And it was so good to see her. And we talked about things after the service and so on and so forth. And I said, you know, to Roberta, you have been so loyal to this ministry all these years. I really admire the fact that you stayed with this ministry and have been loyal to it. And it's so good to see you again. And then I was getting ready to leave, and the pastor's wife came up. And I said, God, it was so nice to see Roberta after all these years. And she said, well, we thought that was the reason you were here. I said, no, I didn't have the slightest idea that she was going to be there. And then as I walked out the door, the pastor was shaking hands with the people as they walked out the door, the same one that 2 weeks before told me I needed to start living as a man and chasing women and blah, stop preaching this stuff I'm preaching now, kind of stuff. As I walked at the door, I shook his hand and I said, I appreciate you. Now, that doesn't mean I appreciated the things he said, but he's done a lot of other things in his ministry, which I did appreciate. You know, I said, I appreciate you, and God bless you. And I might not have totally meant it the second I said it, but by the time I got through saying it, and he said, well, thank you, I did mean it. And I walked out of the door of that church feeling light as a feather. Total happiness and joy and inner peace. Whereas 2 weeks before, I walked out of there negative and full of angerness and bitterness. Well, you know, when you're full of anger and bitterness, you can't do that and have peace both.